What's up, Wizards? It's Devin the Dude from Mtg. Got my boy Ziggy with me for the final day of Zendikar Rising spoilers. That's right, Ziggs. They finally finished the stinking set off. They did like 200 cards in 4 days. And then they did like 20 cards in 3 days. It was a really weird spoiler season pacing this time around. But we finally got the full set list. And there's at least one card from the last couple of days that I think is deceptively incredible. So I want to get to that. But as usual, there's some draft stuff to get to. And I think it's worth evaluating. So let's jump in. Well, let's start today with the 10 cards that they made us wait a whole 24 hours for. We were waiting for them all day yesterday. We knew they were all commons, and we didn't know if there was something really interesting in there. It turns out not really. There's a couple of cool cards in today's batch of commons, but mostly draft stuff that I want to move through relatively quickly, starting with Skyclave Sentinel. 3 mana for a 2/3 Gargoyle with Kicker 4. It's flying and defender, but if you kick it, it enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And as long as it has a +1/+1 counter on it, it can attack as though it didn't have defender. That's interesting because you don't necessarily have to kick it to get a counter on it. There are some sideways +1/+1 counter synergies. It's more of, instead of a built-in, really supported and dedicated mechanic in the set, it's kind of a tertiary mechanic. But it is there, and there are plenty of cards in green and white that distribute counters. So it actually isn't too hard to get a counter on this without kicking it. And at that point, you got a 3-mana, 3/4 flyer that you probably invested some other mana in, but it's still not bad, and any deck can play it. And while you do have it out and it still has defender, at that point, it can block any sort of thing with Windrake stats, and there's a lot of those in this environment. So I actually think this is more playable than it looks at first glance, and it is a common, so you'll very likely have a chance to play it at pre-release or in your drafts. And I think it's an interesting card to make as your 22nd or 23rd card in your deck. It's definitely not something that's pack one, pick one, but it does look relatively strong, and if you do draw in the late game, then suddenly you got a 4-power flyer, and that finishes games in limited. So I kind of like this card. But moving on to Pyroclastic Hellion. This is 5 mana, 4 and a red for a 4/5 Hellion with cool art. And when it ETBs, you may return a land you control to its owner's hand. When you do, Pyroclastic Hellion deals 2 damage to each opponent. So, interesting again in these Gruul landfall decks that will almost certainly be a part of the limited environment. So 5 mana is a bit much, but if you can pop something with this and kill it when it ETBs, and it's more than worth it. And again, I kind of like these landfall things that cost a bunch of mana and return lands to your hand, because once you have 5, 6 mana, and we have seen a 6 mana card like this, once you have 5 or 6 mana, you probably don't have that many other lands in your hand, right? So it's nice to have stuff like this to pop lands back to your hand. Make sure you can get those landfall triggers next turn, or this turn for that matter. So sometimes you'll put this into play, pop a land back to your hand, kill a thing on the other side of the table, and then play that land again to give all your dudes some sort of bonus and swing in hot. So I like Hellion too, but 5 mana is a bit steep, and I probably wouldn't play more than one of these, or maybe 2, because it's removal. I'd probably play 2 of these in a limited deck, but 5 mana is a bit much to see play outside of that environment, and that's kind of an ongoing theme in today's commons. We're going to look at Turn Timber Ascetic next. Excuse me. Tim Timber. It's 5 mana, 4 and a green for a 5/4 giant cleric, and when it ETBs, you gain 3 life. So little ho-hum, I guess, but there are going to be some aggressive strategies in this environment. We just talked about Gruul Landfall, and Gruul Landfall is going to be hot, possibly in Standard, but we know for a fact that it's going to be a heavily supported draft deck. So Turn Timber Ascetic doesn't look actually too bad, because it's going to gain you back a little bit of life that you lost on early swings against either Gruul Landfall or maybe Boros Warriors in draft. That also looks like it's going to be a deck. So, big fat dude that gains you some life. Could be worse. Let's move on to a card I actually kind of like. It's Cliffhaven Kitesail. This is 1 mana for an equipment, and when it ETBs, attach it to target creature you control. Equipped creature has flying, and you can equip it for 2 once the original creature's dead, or you just want to equip it to something else, something fatter. And this isn't bad, man. 1 mana. 1 mana, it's flight, So 1 mana aura effectively gives a creature flying, but it sticks around. It's better than an aura. So for 1 mana, it's not bad. It's really not terrible if you have to play it super early in the game. And even if it's not immediately equipped to a creature, you don't have a dude to put it on, 2 mana to give a fat guy flying is not bad in limited. So I actually think that if there is a standard equipment stack, and it looks kind of budget at this point. I'll talk a little bit more about equipment in a second. But I think if there is a standard equipment deck, then this almost certainly goes in. Because 1 mana for evasion is not bad, especially in a deck that's looking for really cheap equipment to get as much synergy as possible on that theme. Yes, probably standard playable in that way, but I don't know. I don't think the equipment deck is like tier 1. But let's move on here to Chilling Trap. Just 1 blue mana for an instant. Target creature gets -4/-0 till end of turn. If you control a wizard, draw a card. Not bad, right? Yeah, that kind of is bad, actually. I am always interested in 1 blue mana to draw a card, but your opponent has to have a creature, and you have to have a creature with a specific type. So, I don't know. Drawing a card for 1 blue at instant speed is pretty much always going to be playable. So, I'm actually not like counting this out of a sort of mono blue tempo deck. Because, again, I've played mono blue tempo. I've played mono blue mill as well, which wants spells like this. At least when it played Drown Secrets, it did. And now that it plays tutelage, it might want a spell like this too. So I'm actually not counting this out, but again, just like the low-cost equipment we looked at, I'm not counting it out of seeing play in like a standard budget deck that's probably like tier 3. I don't know, there's a lot that has to go right in the board state for this to really be a good card, so I'm a little bit wary of it in all formats, to be honest. But I'll move on to Pressure Point, a little reprint right here. This is 1 and a white for an instant. Tap a creature, draw a card. Again, not terrible. This actually, I think, saw play in the Azorius Hero deck. Heroic. I was trying to remember the name of the mechanic. The Azorius Heroic deck, like, way back. At this point, I feel like an old man, but that was like 5 years ago. We had the blue-white Heroic deck. And I think that this occasionally saw play in that deck, but like, I don't think it's going to happen this time around. But again, 2 mana, instant speed, draw a card. It's not terrible, right? I mean, it could happen in a tempo deck, but I highly doubt it. So I'll move on to Expedition Healer right here. This is 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 2/2 core cleric with vigilance. And it has lifelink as long as you control another cleric. I really want to like this card, and I do in limited, right? 2 mana, 2/2 Vig. It's not bad. You got a bear with a keyword ability, so it's always good in limited. And it has extra gravy if you happen to control another cleric. So yeah, limited. But if you're building the cleric deck in standard, and some people are, this doesn't go in. So yeah. Really good limited filler there. Let me put it that way. But I'll move on to Allied Assault. This is 3 mana, 2 and white for an instant. Up to 2 target creatures each get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures in your party. Now, I am really tempted by this spell. But altogether, it's pretty bad. Like post-Wrath, if you draw it, it's really terrible. It's probably okay on like turn 6, turn 5, if you're able to keep a party out. And from what I've seen so far, like, the party deck just plays, like, 3 different creatures that are always every type. And they try to make that work. And it's really susceptible to Shatter the Sky and stuff. Which I don't like decks that are not good against rats. So I'm not sure, this is going to be a dead card some of the time in your hand because you just don't have any dudes in your party. And then other times it's going to be like 3 whole mana that you have to hold up at instant speed for a super mediocre combat trick that gives 2 creatures like +2/+2. And like that's okay, and that might be good. I'm talking about constructed, by the way, here. If the party deck is a thing, does it play this card is the question I'm asking myself just to catch up to speed. I am not in limited right now. I am in standard. If the party deck is a real thing, does it play this? I don't think so. I really don't think that it wants a 3 mana combat trick like this when it could be doing other stuff. But there's going to be other times where this is effectively +8/+8 for 3 mana at instant speed that ambushes your opponent. You just win the game. So what do I know? Like maybe this is the party version's deck or the party deck's version of like Rally of Wings or something. But I'm not really seeing it. I feel like if I play this card, it's going to be dead in my hand a bunch of times. I'm going to get wrathed, and then I draw it. Opponent's going to Heartless Act into Murderous Rider, completely decimate my board, and I just have this. Then I just have this. Or like maybe you get blown out when you try to cast it, right? You try to cast it, and then your opponent Heartless Acts a guy, and it's just, God. Like, I just think there's better ways of spinning your slots in the party deck than playing this card. Well, let's look at 2 cards that I think are like really good in limited, like very quite good in limited. First of all is Relic Amulet. This is 2 mana for an artifact. Whenever you cast an instant, sorcery, or wizard spell, put a charge counter on Relic Amulet. You can pay 2 and tap it and remove all charge counters from it to deal that much damage to target creature. Now, first of all, the cons that I see with this card, because I want to get to the pros, but first of all, one thing I want to address is that I think that in the limited environment, especially draft, there's going to be a lot of, again, Boros Warriors, or just Boros Aggro, Gruul Landfall, pretty aggressive decks from what I can tell. So I'm not sure, especially if you're on the draw, that you want to play this on turn 2, because then you fall pretty well behind. Even if you play, like, a 1-mana instant spell or a 1-mana wizard on your next turn and you play a land, then you can activate this, but you can only like Tim something. You can ping something for 1 damage. And that's probably still not great. So it's going to take a couple of charge counters to make this good, and then you still have to invest mana into it. So this is kind of a, you have to play it early in order for it to pay off late, but it pays off really, really big late if you've built your deck correctly. And I think it's going to be fairly easy to do that in draft, where there's a lot of instant sorceries and wizards. So I do like this as a later game payoff, but again, you have to devote a turn to it in the relative early game. It's not a great top deck for the most part, especially if you're out of cards when you draw it, because then you have to draw like 2 or 3 wizards or instants or sorceries to make it good, and you have to last that many turns after you draw it. So I don't want to go all in on this. There are some cons, but I will say that this is, a repeatable shoot a guy down in limited, and that's probably good, again, if you have the cards in your deck to support it. So, anytime you play a removal spell, you're getting something off the board and you're adding a charge counter to this, and that seems very good. Even if you're not playing a dedicated wizards deck, if you're just playing a more control-y deck that plays tons of instants and sorceries, controls the board state, then this is eventually going to get out of hand, because you play a removal spell, you take some damage on your opponent's next attack step, on your next turn you play a removal spell, and now you've got 2 charge counters on this, and you can actually legitimately kill stuff. By the time you get 3 charge counters on it, it gets really, really dangerous. So I think this card is actually quite good in limited, but there are plenty of mitigating factors that I think make this card a con if it's drawn at the wrong time or played against the wrong deck. So don't get me wrong, there's obviously issues with this card, but I think that it's one of those things that you build your deck around if you get it early in draft. So I like the card a lot, but again, I don't want to go all in on it. But moving on to Relic Axe, I also like this in limited, again, specifically in draft. This is 2 mana for an equipment, and it enters the battlefield, you attach it to a duder you control. And an equipped creature gets +1/+1. Now, if it's a warrior, it gets +2/+1 instead, and this costs 2 to equip. Now, this compares really favorably to my spoiler, honestly, Scavenge Blade. Now, if you're playing... if you're specifically not playing Warriors, Scavenge Blade is probably better, but if you're playing a lot of Warriors in your draft deck, and I think it'll be fairly easy to draft up a ton of Warriors, especially in Boros, this becomes really, really good. Just effectively a +2/+1 bonus for 2 mana, either way you slice it, whether you're equipping it or casting it, is actually a huge bonus and helps your dudes attack way better. In Standard, I don't think it's there, even though there probably is a Warriors deck. I've seen people talk about this deck a bunch of times online already, and it seems like a lot of people want to make it an equipment deck that plays both Winota and Nahiri. And I'm not sure that's good necessarily, because Winota and Nahiri both cost 4, so that's a little bit awkward. And if you spend your first few turns playing equipment to boost Nahiri, then you're not playing non-humans to attack with and boost Winota. So I think it's a little bit awkward. I do think there's a deck that's, standard Warriors. It plays both Winota and Nahiri, but it mostly plays Nahiri to dig for Winota on turn 4 if it doesn't already have it by turn 4, so you can play Winota on turn 5. I think that's what Nahiri is really for in Standard, is just to get Winota by turn 5 if you didn't get it by turn 4. I don't think that deck plays a whole lot of equipments. It probably plays a bunch of non-human warriors, which there are a lot of right now. Probably plays a lot of non-human warriors in the early game. And then it can, get Winota and spin into stuff like General Kudra and that new Warriors Lord to make a huge attack step. So I think that's what that deck does. I don't think it actually plays that many equipments. So I don't think this card is really worth evaluating too much for Standard. But at the same time, I think in Limited, this is amazing if you draft up the Warriors deck. And I don't think it'll be too hard to do that. But we missed 3 rares from yesterday. 2 of them, well, let me put it this way. One of them I'm not impressed by at all, but it has to play. You have to play it. Another one I'm a little bit more impressed by, but not super stoked on. And then the other one I am incredibly stoked on, and I will come back to talk about that one live in person, face-to-face at the end of the video. But first we got to talk about Throne of Makindi. This is a land that taps for a colorless, or you can pay 1 and tap it to put a charge counter on it. And then you can tap it to remove a charge counter from it to add 2 mana of any one color. You spend that mana only to cast kick spells. I hate it. You have to play this in the kicker deck, right? If you're playing the probably casual kicker deck, then you just have to play 4 copies of this. And I kind of hate it because it's not very good. Even though you must play a playset, it's just not very good. I don't like storage counter lands you have to work for to tap them for any good amount of mana. Sure, it taps for colorless and doesn't interplay tapped, and that's an upside. But at the same time, you have to wait 2 turns. and effectively devote mana to this, because you can't tap this for mana if you want to put a charge counter on it, obviously. You have to hold up another land to put a charge counter on it too, so that's mana you can't use to spin into mana that it's not even accelerating mana. Right? It's not really accelerating mana in the long run, but on the turn you tap it, I guess it is. So you can't tap it for 2 different colors, which I kind of also hate. There's a lot of like restrictive things about this land, but again, in the kicker deck, you have to play 4 copies of it. So welcome to the world, Throne of Mtg. You'll see play, even though I don't like you that much. I guess again, it does ramp on the turn that you do tap it, but not a huge fan. So let's move on to Verizal, the Split Current. There's a lot of jokes involved in the name of this card. But anyway, this is blue-green X for a 0/0 legendary serpent. And when it ETBs, it gets a +1/+1 counter on it for each mana spent to cast it. Really interesting. And whenever you cast a kick spell, you may remove 2 +1/+1 counters from Verizal. If you do, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Cool things about this, first of all, it's not +X+X, where X is equal to the number that you spent on X. No, it's just like you can pay 2 mana for this, and it's just a 2/2. You don't have to pay X for this at all. And it's a 2 mana 2/2. So I kind of like that, first of all. And then obviously in Commander, if this is your kicker commander, which I think there's only like one other kicker commander in the history of the game, and this one looks really cool compared to it. So, but anyway, if this is your kicker commander and it dies or something and you have to pay commander tax for it, then it gets the counters for the commander tax you paid too. And that is just really, really cool. So I kind of like this in Commander. Also, like, that you can not only counter, like, kicked instants and sorceries, but you counter, like, kicked creatures and stuff. And that's, like, a whole new game, dog. Like, that's pretty cool. So there's a lot of awesome things about this card, and, like, maybe it pushes the kicker deck in Standard, but I am still really suspect about that deck. I just don't think that it's going to be incredible. It looks a little bit more kitchen table-y to me, but I'm willing to eat those words. I would love it if the kicker deck was dope. Because a lot of the kicker cards in a vacuum individually look pretty good, but I'm not sure there's enough synergy to put them all together into a deck where everything has kicker. But again, I am willing to be wrong, and I'm hoping that this is actually one of the best cards in the set. But it doesn't. It looks kind of like a janky commander to me, and that's what I like that. I like that. I like when I see Cynic cards that aren't obviously incredibly broken immediately when you first read them. So, I don't know that this slots into any existing thing and just makes it way better. And again, I'm not sure the kicker deck is amazing. So I'm not super stoked on this, but I do like it. I do think it's cool. But, being cool and being super competitive are 2 different things, and I would like it if Simic wasn't the most competitive thing in the world for the next couple of years. But they still have Euros, so probably not going to get that wish. But let's move on to the last card of the day, and I guess the last card of the set. And it's a card that I really, really like for a few reasons. Let's look at Hangarback Walker. Myriad Construct, I meant to say. This is 4 mana for a 4/4 artifact creature that's a construct, and has kicker 3. If Myriad Construct was kicked, it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each non-basic land your opponents control. When Myriad Construct becomes the target of a spell, sacrifice it and create a number of 1/1 colorless construct artifact creature tokens equal to its power. So it's kind of a Hangarback Walker, or at least that's the first thing I thought when I looked at the card. And I think it's supposed to remind you of Walker, but I don't think it's quite as good in as many situations as Hangarback Walker is. But there's some situations where it's just straight up better. Now, first of all, I got to talk about the kicker, because it's actually a lot better than people are grading it. 7 mana is an awful lot, but if you rip this up as a top deck on turn 9 or something like that, then on a lot of standard board states, this is actually going to end up being, a 9/9 or 10/10, because your opponents are going to carry a lot of non-basic lands. That's not going to change anytime soon, right? Especially in this set, where a lot of people are going to be trying to fit these flip lands that are all non-basic lands. Plus the flip duels that we just got, temples, castles. There's a lot of non-basics running around. So if you can't kick this, it's going to have a huge PT when you play it. But getting to the sexiest part of the card, which is that second ability right there, somewhere in there. I don't know if I'm nailing it or not, but still. The last paragraph of text on the card is amazing for a few reasons. I love the way it plays against Brazen Borrower, a card that's going to be everywhere, whether it's in blue-black rogues, some sort of tempo deck, which is also blue-black rogues, or Teamer Adventures, which we know is going to be a deck in the upcoming format. Brazen Borrower is just in everything. Right, control decks as well. So I love the way this plays against that, because your opponent can't just send it back to your hand and be done with it. Right, it's going to split up into at least 4 tokens, if not more. So I love that about it. It leaves a full board to block the Lovestruck Beast, the Bone Crusher Giants, the Beanstalk Giants, and all that stuff. But there's also a really techie rules reason why I love this card, and that's because a lot of judges have already weighed in on this online, and it turns out that there's no intervening if clause in this card's second ability, meaning that when you target it with something, the ability that makes you sacrifice it goes on the stack. Well, then you can target it with something else. And because there's no intervening if clause, that means you get double the amount of tokens. If you can target it with something else, triple the amount of tokens, and so forth and so on. So basically, if the card said, when this becomes the target of a spell or ability, sacrifice it. If you do create X amount of tokens, then you can only target it once, because you're only sacrificing it the one time. But because the card specifically doesn't say if you do, that means you can target it with multiple things while this ability's on the stack and get a whole bunch of tokens when it eventually bursts. But that's all of the Zendikar Rising spoilers, everyone. Finally, they finished the thing off, and we know exactly what this set looks like. I will flesh out my thoughts on this set a little bit more in the coming days, just a couple of days from now. I'll talk about some decks that I want to build from this set and whether or not I truly believe that this set is good enough. And I think that it's very important that this set hit all the right notes for a couple of different parts of the player base. But again, I'll talk more about that in a future video coming real soon. Plus, we've got the top 10 sleepers, the top 25 cards in the set. There's a whole bunch of content to put out, and then we'll start doing deck techs as well. You want to be here for that. So sub if you can, and you haven't done that yet. Hit the bell for notifications, like the video, do all that. And if you want to help choose what decks we do at the beginning of this season, go over to the Patreon, hit the link in the description. $1 a month is all I ask, so that you can vote on what deck techs come first, and throughout the entire season for that matter. Also, go over to Twitch if you want to watch me play Magic or give more thoughts. I'm going to be streaming on Sunday of this week, sometime in the afternoon, EST, Eastern Standard Time. And I'm going to be talking more about sort of how I feel about this set, what it needs to do, and whether or not it actually did those things. So check that out if you can, and of course go over to TCG Player, again, link in the description, if you want to pre-order anything from Zendikar Rising. So do all of that stuff, and I will catch you cats later. Looking forward to a good season coming up. At the very least, we're getting rid of Hydroid Krasis, we're getting rid of Nissa, we're getting rid of Narset, we're getting rid of a bunch of problematic cards that we don't have to worry about anymore, and I think that might affect things. Yeah, Euro's still a problem, Adventures is a problem, Yugen is a problem, but does this set carry the tools to make sure that we're not in a Euro Adventures Ugin meta? We'll talk about that at a later date. So anyway, I think I'm done for now. Love you guys, and I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.